Well, hello, welcome to the video. This one is a weird one. I mean, weird. Even more weird than normal. This is about my connections with organised crime. Yes, I have connections with organised crime. It's not as bad as you think, because of obviously the music industry, especially in the 1970s, 1980s, etc., the era of pub rock, there were a lot of shady people about, and I met a few of them. In a bit later on, I'll talk about Flyposters, called the Flyposting Mafia, and they were fighting and things. I'll tell you about that later, but first time is when I tangled with the Krays. Well, not exactly. What happened was, in 1975 it must have been, I did do a bit of research about this, and half things I thought were true turned out to be slightly different to how I remember them. Things like the year, because I thought it was a bit earlier than this. I thought it was about 1972, 1973, but the person in question wasn't around till 1975, so it could have been then. I thought the pub was a different name, and I've looked on a map and I've checked it out, and it is the same place, and I've looked at the pictures and things like that. It just goes to show that the brain can change things without you knowing about it, so bear that in mind when you're talking to your spouse. Anyway, what happened was, in 1975 it must have been, I'd left Chelmsford about 73, 74 maybe, but I still had to go there from time to time because I did shows there and stuff like that, and I had friends there, and it must have been one of those times, because I can remember coming down on the train from Chelmsford, and that gets to Liverpool Street Station. It was a Sunday morning, which in the East End of London is traditionally market day, and I was a big fan of Petticoat Lane Market, Brick Lane Market, and Brick Lane, the Indian restaurants, because back then they were genuinely Indian restaurants, most of them, or Pakistani. They were not the generic Indian restaurant style that we have today. There was a Pakistani restaurant which was there till quite recently, because I went there probably 10 years ago, which I used to go to back then. So it had pictures of wrestlers from Lahore on the walls and things like that, and they served cheap food to the local workers. I used to go in there and a bit cheeky, but nobody minded. They were very friendly, and that was good. But anyway, I digress. What happened was, I came down on the train to Liverpool Street Station, and across the road from there, I think I went to the market, probably didn't buy anything because I didn't buy a lot then, and I went into a pub. I thought it was called the Globe or something like that, but it turns out to be called Woodin's Shades, which is an old name because back in the day this was a wine merchant called Mr. Woodin, or Wodin, no one seems to know how to pronounce it, and Shades was an old term for a wine house where you would sell your wine. Anyway, I went in there as I did, and very good looking blonde, very much in the style of Barbara Windsor, although taller and even prettier than her. She was sitting at the bar, and there's this guy next to her with that fairly long hair and in a camel hair coat, and they were chatting, and he was smoking a cigar and stuff, because in those days you could smoke in pubs. I think I smoked then. Yes, I smoked Marlboro back then. Yuck, horrible, isn't it? Don't want to smoke. How I ever smoked, I will never know. But anyway, went to the bar, guy smoking, blah, blah, blah. They turned to the barman and says, get him a drink, I'm paying. I think I had a pint of bitter, which is what I drank back then. Well, still do when I go to pubs these days. Anyway, got chatting to this guy and had a few drinks and things, and I never knew who he was, and we were talking about stuff, and he said he'd been abroad and had just come back, and he said, call me Charlie, and I think the girl was called, not Gloria, it was something like that. Really, this is all a haze to me. This is probably the autumn and spring of 1975, and obviously this is now 50 years later, so it's a bit hazy in my head. Anyway, we got on very well and just chatting, and I tried to buy drinks, and he goes, don't insult me, this is my treat. And I said, right, you're my mate. And I said, and bear in mind, we just met, we got on very well, and there was a guy in a car, it was a Jaguar, I think it was like a metallic sort of weird green or something like that. So we got in that, and we went off somewhere quite close, I don't know, like a local calf sort of thing. Went in there, and they're doing Sunday roast. Went in there. I had a vegetarian, which in those days, if you're doing like a calf, would have been everything on the plate that people would normally have, just no meat. So I'd have no gravy, no meat, and I'd just have like potatoes. But anyway, it is what it is, and we enjoyed it. And then we went to, I can remember the pub we ended up in, I suppose we started about 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, something like that, maybe earlier, maybe, I don't know. Because the thing about the markets in those days was Petticoat Lane and Brick Lane started really early. I don't know if they still do. I mean, if you went there at 7 o'clock in the morning, they were actually selling stuff, you know. And this is a Sunday morning, and it would peter out about lunchtime. So anyway, this could have been any time. And we ended up in the Carpenter's Arms, which is a famous pub, which was actually owned by the Kray twins. I don't know what happened. He went out somewhere, maybe, and she went to the toilet or something. And the barman said to me, have you known Charlie long? I said, no, I've just met him actually. And he says, you do know who he is, don't you? I said, well, no, Charlie, I don't really know what he does. Apparently he manages a band or something, or he's going to manage a band. I don't know, that's about all I know. And he said, yeah, mate, that's Charlie Kray. His family own this pub and half of the pubs that were around here. And he's just got out of Nick. And that's what it was, apparently. He came back and we had one more drink and he went. The strange thing was that the band that he was going to manage or was managing was called Stray. And later on at the Borderline and the 100 Club, I put on Stray quite a lot, and Del Bromham became a friend. And he used to say that people were very nervous about them, and he thinks that the reason they didn't make it big is simply because Charlie Kray managed them and that people kept them at arm's length. Now, whatever, back in those days, the music business was full of gangsters. I mean, it really was. From the 60s, well, from the 50s onwards, there were gangsters. Well, even the jazz clubs were gangsters in the 40s and 50s and all that. And in the 50s and 60s, the band managers were like Hoods and the people like Don Arden, who is the father of Sharon Osbourne, who managed a lot of bands. I mean, he famously dangled somebody out the window and all that, and he was called Machine Gun Arden. So I never met Charlie Kray again after that, although I did bump into him once at a do, and he didn't recognise me, so I didn't make myself known, and he was with people, and obviously I was very small fry, and he was trying to be big fry. Well, he was big fry years. Back in those days, there were a lot of gangsters in the music business. There's a lot of funny stuff going on, like I'll come on to the Flyposting a bit later on, but that was basically run on violence. And yet all the record companies, all the big management companies, they all use these illegal fly posters. By gangsters, I'm not thinking about the 1930s in Chicago where they all had machine guns and had shootouts and made whiskey all the time. I'm talking about this way of working where you don't go to the courts or you don't like complain to the council or the police about something. You go around and and violence is actually either threatened or it's inflicted. And a lot of this in the music business was because a lot of the managers and a lot of the agents and people like that came out of the East End or wherever, or South London or whatever, and they weren't used to, well, they weren't public school boys or grammar school middle class people, and they basically, that was how things were done. They weren't particularly educated in the way of business, and so there was a bit of a free-for-all, and it was general. I mean, there's a program called Minder on the TV featuring Arthur Daly, played by George Cole, and a lot of stuff in that program. Well, I used to watch everybody I knew, and I used to work for a guy who was an ex-bank robber, and all his friends used to watch it, and he used to be friends with like the intelligent members of the Great Train Robbers, because I don't know if you know, but most of the people that we know about, Buster Edwards and what's the one who went to Brazil, all those ones we hear about were the workers, they were the soldiers. The people who were up the ladder more were people like Roy James, who you never hear about. Roy James, he was a racing driver and he was a friend of the guy I used to work for. But basically my point was he used to watch Minder because it was all truthful, and strangely he owned a wine bar and that was where the production was often based. So I don't know what that would be, art imitating life or whatever. Oh, I don't know. Anyway, before we get into all this with the guy I used to work for who was a former bank robber, let's get into that. But first of all, I've got something to say to you. Hang on a minute, before we get to talking about the ex-bank robber I used to work for, if you like this, please like. And also, I noticed I'm very close to getting 12,000 subscribers. So if you could push me over and subscribe, if you're not already subscribed, that would be great. If I'm already over that, I must have another goal, which will probably be 15,000. And if I get to 15,000 before I die, then I know my life will not have been in vain.
There's no regrets. No tears goodbye.
And around this same time, I met a guy called Peter, I won't say his surname, and he was an ex-bank robber who basically had been let out of prison to go to Cambridge University because he was very bright and he did like his A-levels in prison and then he did a degree in prison, and they sent him to Cambridge University to do something, and he got involved with Professor Laurie, what's his name? Professor Laurie, I'll put the name up, who was a BBC guy. He was a psychiatrist, I think, at York University, and he specialised in looking at criminals. Peter was a very nice guy. I can't remember how I met him now. Somebody I knew introduced me, and we basically got on very well. He persuaded me to do some worked with him because he was starting a t-shirt company, or a marketing company that was doing mainly t-shirts, printing t-shirts and badges and things like that. And he basically wanted somebody like me, because I was at the time still living in Cambridge and Ely and all that, and he wanted me to be his agent up there and go around the markets and things. So I did that, and I got to know him quite well. I always got on very well with him, and he was a very nice guy. I mean, let's get this straight. He was a very charming man. He was a very cultured man. He knew a lot more than I did about literature, and he certainly knew a lot more about psychology and about psychiatry and all that stuff, and about how the brain works. And we became sort of very friendly, and in the end he set up a company with a childhood friend who was involved in the industry. By the way, they both had shady pasts, and he asked me to be the managing director of the company and the manager of the thing and front it basically for him. And I was being paid pretty well to do this, although I had to work, obviously. I wasn't like sitting around just banking my checks. I had to do quite a lot of work, and it involved humping t-shirts, big boxes of t-shirts all the time. They'd arrive from Romania or whatever, and you'd basically have an Arctic full of boxes of t-shirts or sweatshirts, and it would take four of us, and this would be Peter, me and Brian and Harvey, who was the other director. It would basically take us like all day Sundays to unload one of these Arctics. Then of course we'd have to be back at work on Monday morning bright and early. And through him I met various people, and one guy that I did meet through him was a guy called Irish Tony, who was one of the guys, well, he was a security man, apart from the he was a big Irish traveller. He had all the trappings of fight. He had broken nose, ears hanging everywhere. And he was, again, quite a nice chap. Not as charming as Peter, and definitely not as educated as Peter, but streetwise, shall we say. And he did security for people like ABBA, and I remember him telling me personal details about the members of ABBA and stuff like that. And one of the things he used to do was, he was also involved with this thing, because back in those days, they used to sell, well, at a big concert and a festival and whatever, all-day event, they would have like merchandising, which they'd sell t-shirts, badges, sweatshirts and all that. And the big thing was that these guys, and Irish Tony used to organise this thing, it was totally illegal, but a lot of payoffs and things. And they used to stand outside these festivals or go to the Hammersmith Odeon and stand outside that and sell better versions, because, well, they get them done by our t-shirt company basically. And I wasn't really involved in that, but the designer who was like the production guy there, the production director, Harvey, he knew a guy who was an artist, and they used to do all these fantastic t-shirt designs, which are often better than the ones inside, because it was all done cash, if you know what I mean. Not involving me. I never saw any of this. I only signed VAT returns, things like that, and whatever, and saw the bank manager, stuff like that. So I was involved in all these nefarious dealings. Peter used to go and buy the t-shirt cash from the wholesaler, and they print them after hours. They wouldn't be bagged up or anything. They'd just be in big folds, say like 20 or whatever, and they'd be folded over. So these people could walk round, one selling small, one selling medium, one selling large, one selling extra large, and they'd be like half the price of the ones inside, but they'd be better quality, better printed, better design. So what's not to like? Except obviously the artist and the venue, the promoter are not getting a share of it. It's all going to, well, basically the people I've just mentioned. And he went off and he formed a company that was involved with the Rainbow Theatre. And I wasn't involved with this, so I didn't really know about it. But apparently when Harvey Goldsmith, there's something to do with Harvey Goldsmith anyway, and it was to do with the Rainbow Theatre and merchandising. I think the Who's management company came into it and things like that. And it was like, again, was legalising this thing. So they would basically have this company, which was a legitimate merchandising company. And they used to buy the rights to sell at various things legitimately. But I happen to know for a fact they'd also have people outside doing the unauthorised t-shirts and things outside. So there you go. So that's that. And I'm coming on to Flyposting right now. There's a very good online history of Flyposting, which states that it starts with, I think it was Napoleon's grandson or great-grandson or something, to spread his cause, did flyposting on the coast of France. The Victorian days, it was all it's when the gangs really started doing it, and there were fights in the streets about who could put their posters up on walls, things like that. And by the time I got involved in this, well, I wasn't involved in the flyposting. I used to pay them to put posters up. Let's get that right. And so by the 1970s, when I was starting starting to get involved in this. There were basically teams of people. By this time, they'd had their fights. They basically had wars. I mean, people had been hurt and they'd got their patch. Like in North London, there were two guys, and this article gets one of the names wrong, I think, because I remember them being a guy called Dave something or other and Terry the Pill, who was called Terry the Pill because he used to sell pet pills to mods back in the 1960s. So anyway, they did North London, above the Thames and Finsbury Park and all that bit, which is the big bit. And then South East London was a guy called Dave Hutton, who I knew later, because obviously I was at the Cricketers, so I got to know him quite well. And then there was someone else who did South East London and sort of Wimbledon and Richmond and all that. And I can't remember his name, but I never really dealt with him because that wasn't really my target. The way it used to work was you used to have your preferred thing, like in your area. What you're supposed to happen was, in your area, you would go to the local flypost. Like if you were at the Cricketers, you'd go to Dave Hutton, which is the guy I used to go to. Incidentally, I interviewed him for Time Out later on. Not a lot of people know that. I'd go to see him, and I probably wouldn't see him. I'd see his man, his guy, who was like a big guy, and I can't remember his name, but he was like very friendly. They're all very nice. And so what happened was, I'd go down there, and the guy who's his assistant's name is on the tip of my tongue, I just can't think of it. Either they would print them, because Dave Hutton used to have a printing works. I think it was down the Old Kent Road. It was an industrial estate off the Old Kent Road, just by the Tesco's in this industrial estate, because I went there quite a lot. And basically, they had the printing there. I used to draw a little diagram of what the poster I wanted it to look like, because I found that if you did it over the phone, you often got spelling mistakes. So they'd be like something like £1 each or something like that. And that would include putting them up. But the thing about it was, I don't know how many they actually printed, but you can bet that this was the common thing, because you always got twice as many as you actually needed. If you had a good relationship with your fly poster, things were fine, everything was great. But if they thought you were just a one-off customer or they didn't like you, you get things like that. They might put up half of them, but you can see quite a lot of them would be like 8 or 10 in some back streets in Rotherhithe, because there'd be prime spots, and if you press for those prime spots, like on main roads and things like that, and eventually over the years, over the like 80s and 90s that I was vaguely involved in all this, there were changes. Like there was a guy who again lived in Finsbury Park, I used to do it, who eventually moved all my, because I think Dave Hutton stopped or whatever, or somebody else took over, and there was another guy started, and he took over part of the North London that had been done by this guy Dave, not Dave Hutton, and Terry the Pill, and his name's on the tip of my tongue. He was an Irish guy. I keep thinking Vince, but that's probably Vince Power, isn't it? No, I can't remember that. It wasn't Vince Power, nothing to do with him. I think Malcolm at the Roby put me onto him. And there's another guy who used to do printing in the West End. So they worked together, these guys. So quite often I'd get them to do stuff, and especially I was doing big shows at the upstairs at the Clarendon and things like that. Like even later, like when I was doing my festivals, John Curd, who would used to do all the shows upstairs at the Clarendon, the ones I didn't do, and all the shows at the Lyceum and all these other things, all the big shows at the Roundhouse I went to in 1973, he took over and he did me really good deals. And so it just changed all the time. I remember once at the Cricketers, I was there doing something. The landlord had arranged for Dave Hutton and a few of his guys to meet up downstairs in the bar. And what happened was they all turned up, and they were not just them, there were like a bunch of guys turned up as well in the back of a van, and they all had like baseball bats and stuff like that. And apparently they were going off to have a bit of a fly posting war. So I know nothing about that, nothing to do with me whatsoever. So now the guy who used to work for Dave Hutton was called Glenn, I think. So anyway, thanks for watching, and hope you enjoyed it. And I'll do one more on bands and venues next time. Thanks for watching. And this one you might like if you're into my sort of stuff. Goodbye.